Welcome, and this is an overview of our semester-long project, Rainbow Restaurant Rush. My name's Mateo, and I'll be taking you guys through some gameplay in just a couple seconds. The premise of Rainbow Restaurant Rush is that you're a server, a waiter, and you're feeding your customers food. The objective is just to get as much food to your customers as possible. You only have 3 lives, and you'll see that play out and how this becomes a challenge once you have more customers and the customers require their food within a certain time limit. The instructions here tell you exactly how to play the game. We're going to be using our arrow keys, left, right, and up. We've incorporated different difficulties, easy, medium, and hard. Easy having the least amount of customers, medium having 4 customers, and hard having 5 customers. Once you feed a customer 3 times, that customer is satisfied and a new customer is generated in which you have to feed again. And this endless game turns into a really challenging memory game because you have to remember the position of which character in terms of the table and feeding them in the most efficient way possible in order for you to get a better score. So let's jump right into medium. As you can see, when you feed them incorrectly, they're not too happy about it. And you also have to feed them within a certain time limit, or else they'll disappear. Oh no, the game's over. I wasn't able to feed all the customers and I ran out of lives. This is the basic premise of the game, and going through the different levels you can see that it becomes harder or easier based off what you choose. Contributions. In terms of the contributions to Rainbow Restaurant Rush, my first focus was designing and implementing a working timer. Because our game depends on the customers' timers to run out, we had to implement this feature relatively soon. This was accomplished for our alpha build, and the premise here is that we have a way to count down in real time and have a visual indicator of that countdown. Now, my first focus was just creating the timer. The actual UI element ended up not changing over time, but just adjusting it after each iteration. Now, you'll notice a couple of variables up here. These are just variables that help this timer function in terms of resetting it when either a customer's time runs out or the character is fed incorrectly. All of these essentially link to another function which add a strike or essentially remove a life from the player. But we'll begin here with the start function. Now the start just initializes the variables in terms of the difficulty, so you can see here in the comments that if the difficulty is 4, this is an easy level. And this difficulty is actually set way in the character behave script earlier on, and this is all dependent on which mode you click on. The update function is essentially what just reduces the timer. You can see here that we truncate the timer and we round it down to have a nice full whole number. And this line here on 57 is what updates our image to be reduced in terms of the timer UI. And so we use a circle, a solid circle, and this is a sprite element. And all it does is it reduces the fill amount as it reduces time, making a visual indicator of what time is left for that character. Once the timer ends, you can see that we have hard-coded some variables here to define that, but most importantly, we add a strike, or in other words, we remove a life from the player. Here we can see that we call the timer's grandparent, and this is what we use essentially to remove the player once the time's been completely run out of, and we need to replace that customer, which we call a function over here. And lastly, we have a reset timer just to make sure everything is reset properly. We again go ahead and reassign the values based off the difficulty. Timer is comprised of a couple elements that I wanted to show you. The first one being just a text element that holds the countdown. So this will change to whatever the timer is at, whether it be 15, 14, 13, you name it. On top of that, we have the image that we're using, which is that green circle. And what I want you guys to notice is here on the right-hand side in the inspector, this is actually the property that we're changing as our script continues in the timer script. The fill amount is what's being affected here. So what you can see is this is the effect that we have within our game, but it's just made by this property. And lastly, our timer controller, which holds our script, which allows us to connect both this countdown text and this image to be manipulated. And that's what essentially consists of the timer. Now, beginning with transitioning the scenes, this was a process that continuously changed as we were adding scenes and changing them. Essentially, what we use here is the scene management straight from Unity Engine to load our scenes. And you'll see that down here on our onTransitionComplete. Now, this function is used as an event for the transition, and this is what essentially allows us to start a transition, have it notice this event, call this event or function, and then load the scene and continue the rest of the transition. That way, in between levels, we can create a transition, and that intermittent loading that might occur isn't present to the user. But essentially, we take the build index of our scenes and we set those equal to which ones they are, and then I've labeled these dependent on which scene they are. So start, instructions, level select, easy, medium, hard, game over, and our credits scene. A very simple script, but very effective. And also important to note, it does take an animator, which is our actual transition. And what we'll see here first is our level loader. This consists of a canvas with the left side and the right side of our transition. And these are really just PNGs that were converted into sprites. And what they do is they're keyframed in this animation to move. And in our slide out, you'll notice that event that I was speaking about earlier, which triggers the scene to be loaded once this closes. And that lets us have a really smooth transition. But our level loader uses our level loader script and an animator, which animates this entire transition effect. As I reflect about contributing to this game in the last couple of months, there's a couple things that were extremely obvious and a couple things that I still never understood. Now, one of those things is about working with others. And in nature, it's obvious that working with others, we run into conflicts and we have to find these ways to sort of collaborate in a way that's beneficial to both parties. And one of the most efficient ways that we were able to do this was using Trello. Now, by using Trello, we were able to manage our project in terms of what needs to be created on the art side of the game and what needs to be developed on the developer side. in terms of scripts, in terms of connecting the dots, scenes, Unity, etc. One of the coolest things that we saw was breaking our tasks and knowing exactly when we needed to finish these tasks. So essentially setting a deadline was one of the most beneficial things that we ever did. And having weekly recaps, we were able to manage how fast we were putting out, essentially to make sure that we were on track and that we wouldn't fall behind. Now, of course, there's still so much more to learn, and those being the issues we had with GitHub and how to resolve those. As we were working through our project, we of course ran into a bunch of technical issues that we slowly fixed and some worked around. Will we ever understand those? I don't know. But we also learned a lot about Unity, which to me was a mix of development, of coding, of connecting the products that you end up making in a lot of 3D modeling and animation software in terms of Maya, Blender. A lot of the elements and a lot of the way you interact with Unity was very similar. Because there's so much that I've learned in the last couple months working in this group, creating this game, I'm just going to summarize the top 3 things that I've learned. One, it's that it's so important to understand those who you work with in terms of compatibility and in terms of workflow. 2, that it's extremely important to understand what you're responsible for and how you're going to get that accomplished. And lastly, it's so important to just communicate, whether it's in a group, whether it's in a project, or even if it's in just a friendship or relationship. Communication is so important, and this project really highlighted that.